So this is a continuation of the previous session. In the first part, just a recap for anybody who's just walked in the first section, I talked a little bit about automation. Then I walked through a lot of stuff with Automator, and we talked briefly about services. In this half, I'm going to mainly talk about AppleScript. So if anybody has Automator questions or services-related questions, you're welcome to come up and talk to me afterwards, or I'll be here till tomorrow. All right, so AppleScript. I want to mention first off how you actually get started writing a script. So first of all, in your application library or application utilities folder, you will find AppleScript editor. This is what you use generally to write your AppleScripts. It's just a basic AppleScript editor. It's actually, I use this myself, like that's my script editor of choice. But there is also a third-party script editor as well that has a lot more advanced features, like for debugging scripts and things like that. It's called Script Debugger from Late Night Software. So you could check that out too if you really want to get into writing scripts. A lot of people find it helpful because it has a lot of shortcuts and troubleshooting tools and things like that. I used to use it and I kind of got my techniques to the point where I can troubleshoot stuff in other ways. Also, Xcode. You can get it in the Mac App Store, and you should probably sign up for the Apple Developer Connection, which you can get a free online membership. Is good to have just for reference only, even, to be able to go on and look up stuff. So Xcode you would use if you want to create like an application with an interface. So if you want to build an AppleScript app that looks and feels like any other app, you would build it in Xcode using something called AppleScript Objective-C, which is, I don't know if anybody's ever heard of AppleScript Studio, but AppleScript Studio it was a feature set of Xcode prior to Snow Leopard, I believe, that Apple has now deprecated and replaced with AppleScript Objective-C. So I was asked the other day, is AppleScript going anywhere? I don't know. I don't see it going anywhere until there's a suitable replacement for it. But Apple did just invest a pretty considerable amount of time in developing AppleScript Objective-C, which allows AppleScript to talk to Objective-C components and features in the operating system. So tomorrow I have a session on giving your AppleScript a facelift. It's all about AppleScript Objective-C. So if you're interested in that, you can come to that as well. And that's not a 2.5-hour session. It's an hour and 15 minutes. Okay, so Xcode for like really complex AppleScripts with interfaces and things like that. If you want to build Automator actions, you can write Automator actions in AppleScript Objective-C. You can use Xcode to do that. If you want to write just basic AppleScripts, you're probably going to use Script Editor or AppleScript Editor. It used to be called Script Editor, now it's called AppleScript Editor. Or you can look at Script Debugger. Okay, so first step in AppleScripting something. Figure out what you want to write a script to do. Typically, it's going to be something that you're doing that's time-consuming or repetitive. But how do you get started? And this is like one of the things people struggle with, whether it's Automator or AppleScripts. Like, well, I know I'm doing this process over and over again, but how can I automate it? So the first thing that I recommend doing, and I do this for like almost every script, I create an outline. If I'm writing if I'm going to propose on a script for a client, like somebody comes to me and they want a script to do something, I'm going to outline the functionality of that script in a proposal and give it to them. I then will take that outline and copy it into a script editor document and write my code around that outline. So I have an outline that I just threw together that that shows you kind of how I would do this. Let me just change my my size here so you can see a little bit better. Okay, so suppose I want to write a script that's going to separate files by modification date into different folders. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to prompt the user to select a folder to process, and then I'm going to target the Finder, because the Finder is where they're going to be working. And if I'm writing an actual script outline, I'm probably not going to put every single one of these steps in. So I kind of did a little bit of this for your benefit. But then I'm going to get a list of the files in that folder that the user chose, and I'm going to start looping through them. I'm going to get the modification date of the current file. I'm going to get the month, day, and year of the modification date, because the modification date includes like the time and things like that, which maybe I don't want that. Then I'm going to build a name for the folder, and I'm going to figure out where I want to create the folder. Check to see if the folder exists already. So you can see now we're getting into some logic, right? You can't do this stuff with Automator. Automator can't decide. Like some of the actions might be smart enough to look and see, does this folder already exist or not? But there's no logic that you have control over, really. So AppleScript, you can actually like check to see if something exists before you create it. All right, so if the folder doesn't exist, then create it at in the specified folder that the user chose, and then move the current file into that date folder. All right, so I'm going to kind of just get right into writing a script. I'm going to write a script, and then I'll kind of walk you through a little bit about like some more steps for how you would do this kind of a thing. All right, so the first thing I want to do is I want to prompt the user to choose a folder. So there's actually a command in AppleScript called choose folder. And if I run that, you can see it just asks the user to choose a folder. But I need to take that folder that they're selecting and get a reference to it so I can refer back to it later. So I'm going to create a variable. So I'm going to say set the folder to choose folder. All right, so this is taking whatever folder the user chooses, and it's putting it into a variable called the folder. And when you write a script, you can run your script as you're writing it to kind of make sure you're getting the correct results that you want. So here I'll just choose the desktop. And you can see down at the bottom here, if you don't have this area visible, you can just kind of drag it up. There's a few different buttons. The result button shows you the result of the script. So this is the last thing that the script did, if it had a result. Not everything will have a result. But it's showing you the result of the last operation that the script performed. So in this case, I only have one line of code. Everything with the 2 dashes before it is a comment. So in AppleScript, you comment by putting 2 dashes. So like when I said I will take somebody's proposal and convert it into a script, I will paste it in and I'll just add dashes before it, probably with a service or something like that. Okay, so result shows you everything that happened in your script, and then events shows you, the result shows you the last thing that happened in your script. Events shows you kind of everything that happened in your script. So it shows you like what application is being targeted and what commands are being executed and what the result is. So you can refer back to this when you run a script, if it doesn't do what you want it to do or something like that, and maybe see what the you might be able to figure out where the problem should be or where the problem is. So the 2 dashes and the greater than symbol, just means that this is the result of the choose folder command. And then it shows me, again, the script's full result. So anyway, this is a valuable, troubleshooting area in AppleScript Editor. Along the top of the window, you have a record button, a stop button, a run button, and a compile button. I will mention the record button shortly, but basically, you're probably not going to go up to the toolbar very often, but run, runs the script, obviously. Compile compiles the script, so you can see when I start typing, it's in a different color. This is because it's uncompiled text, but when I compile it, it changes color. This is where the script checks for syntax error. So if I leave off that R and go to compile, I get an error because it's compiling. AppleScript, its syntax is evaluated at runtime. So let's say you write an AppleScript that controls Photoshop, and then you send it to somebody. Well, if they try to run that and they don't have Photoshop on their machine, the script is going to get an error because it can't find Photoshop to access its terminology. So just because you have it on your machine and it compiles on your machine doesn't mean it's necessarily going to run on somebody else's machine unless they have the same applications that the script targets. Okay. Next, I want to target the Finder because that's where I'm going to create these folders and move things to. So in AppleScript, whenever you talk to an application, you say tell app, and then parentheses the name of the app that you want to target. App, you can write as application or app. Most of the time, you're just going to write app because why type the whole thing? And then whenever you write, whenever you have a tell, you have to have an end tell. So you have to, at the end here, say end, and you could just write end. And then when you compile, if you push the enter key, it will compile your script as well. So most of the time, you're not going to want to go all the way up here to click compile. But you can see that this changes color now. And in the AppleScript editor's preferences are all the styles that are used for different things. So if you want to adjust these, you can change them. But I typically just use the default AppleScript editor text style. Okay, so tell application finder is basically saying to AppleScript, okay, anything that you find inside this tell block is going to be targeted to the finder. So like AppleScript, it doesn't know what a folder is. It doesn't know what a file is. It doesn't know what a disk is. AppleScript itself just has like a core language, like set, get, tell, right? These are core AppleScript words. But file, folder, disk, those are things that the finder understands. And every application has its own dictionary, so you have to tell AppleScript that you want that anything in here goes to the finder, right? If you're going to do something with playlists and tracks, you're going to tell application iTunes, right? So, and you can have nested tell statements, so you could have tell application finder, tell application iTunes. I don't typically recommend that. I try to keep my tell statements separated, just in case there's rare occasions where you can have like conflicting terminology. So anyway, so basically this is saying, okay, anything inside the tell application finder goes to the finder. So when I go to compile this code, AppleScript will look at the finder's dictionary to see if any of this terminology, if it can match it there. All right, so the next thing I want to do is I want to get a list of the files in the folder. So first thing, user's choosing a folder, then I'm going to have the finder get a list of files. So I'm going to set another variable called the files to every file of the folder. Right, so I'm referring back to the variable that contains the folder the user chose. And now my variable, the files, should contain a list of any chosen file, or any files in that folder. So if I, again, run this and I choose my desktop, you can see the result of my script, the last thing that happened, is I got a list of files. And this is alias file, blah, 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 of folder desktop, of folder B Waldie, of folder users, blah, 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 right? This is finder terminology. So this is a path that the finder understands. In AppleScript, you have to be very specific how you refer to things, right? So if I'm referring to a file on my desktop, I got to tell AppleScript and the finder that I want the file on the desktop. And where's the desktop? It's in my user directory, which is in users, which is at the root level of the hard drive. So I have to tell it very specifically where I want to find that file. Same thing with, let's say iTunes. If you want to target a track, you have to tell it, track X of playlist X or whatever, right? So you have to be very specific about where you're referring to things. Okay, so these are finder paths, and now I'm going to loop through them. So there's different kinds of repeat loops in AppleScript, but I'm going to do what's called a repeat with. So repeat with the current file in the files. And just like a tell statement, a repeat loop has to have an end. So I'm going to say end, and if I compile that, you can see it automatically adds the repeat, right? Okay, so here I've got a variable that has a list of files in it, and now I want to repeat through those files. So when I say repeat with the current file is like a dynamic variable. I'm not saying set this to this, but the repeat loop is automatically setting it each repeat to whatever the current file in the repeat is. So if I have 3 files, the first time it loops, this variable will contain a reference to file 1. The next time it's file 2, and so forth. And there's other kinds of repeat loops you can do as well, but for this one, we're just going to use this one. All right. Next, we're going to get the modification date of the current file. So in AppleScript, items that you interact with have attributes, usually have attributes. And in the Finder, files and folders have attributes too. They have modification dates, they have names, they have label colors, they have container folders. They have all different attributes that you can get access to. So I'm going to set a variable called the modification date to modification date of the current file. So when I do, you can name variables however you want. Some people just set X to, set Y to. I like to make my variable names as descriptive as possible and you can use numbers, letters, numbers, and underscores. but it has to start with a letter or an underscore. But I try to make my variable names as descriptive as possible, because most of the time when I write a script for a client, I may not have to go back to it for like a year or two until they need an update. And in a year or two, I've totally forgotten what the script does. So that's one reason why creating a script around an outline is helpful, because nobody goes back and writes comments for the most part in scripts. Bless you. Once you write a script, you're done. Like most people are like, oh, I'm done writing the script. But if you don't comment your script, then you have to relearn it the next time you go to edit it. Or if you have somebody else go to edit it, they have to learn your script and go through it entirely. So outlining a script or commenting a script is like really important. And you know, every time a client comes to me and they're like, oh, we have an existing script we want updated, first thing I do is I go through and outline it, because with comments, because it's most likely not commented, and it takes me forever to go through the script, and I don't want to have to do it a second time. And the variable names as well. If it says set X to something, I don't know what X is. I may have to like track back up through a big long script to try to figure out what X is, and its value might change throughout the script all different times. Yeah. Yeah, you can do a find and replace throughout. I mean, you want to be careful, like variable X, you know, because X might be a part of another word or something like that. So you just want to be careful how you do that. But yeah, you can do that as well. Okay, so anyway, so I recommend very verbose variable names that are descriptive, so that they'll help you and they'll help whoever else might be editing your script. All right. Next up, I want to get the month, day, and year of the modification date. So a date in AppleScript, it has attributes, and some of those attributes are date, day, month, and year. So I'm going to set the month to month of the modification date as string. So actually, you know what? I'm going to comment this line out, and I'm just going to run the script here so you can see the result. So here's a date, right? This is an AppleScript date. And if I run it now, if I uncomment that and run it, you can see that it gives me May as the month. Set the day to day of the modification date as string. And if I run this, you can see it gives me the 23rd. And year as well. Okay? Now I'm going to build a folder name. So we'll say set the date folder name to the month, ampersand, and ampersand is used to append strings together, right? So I'm gonna put a space after the month, and the day, and then I'll put a comma and the year. Okay, so that gives me this date. There are some shortcuts. You can actually say, I'm just going to say, so if I say return, it stops the script there and it returns whatever I tell it to return. So if I want to if I want to check the modification date here and make sure it's giving me the value I want, I can do that. And nothing below that return line gets run. So there's some shortcuts you can use. You can say short date string of the modification date, and that will return this. But again, that contains slashes that you probably don't want. Or you could just say date string of the modification date, which gives you this. But that has the weekday in it, which maybe I don't want. So that's why I'm building the date a little bit differently. If I wanted to do like year-month.day, I could do that as well. I just have to write a little bit more code here to format it. Okay. Also, for anybody who came in late or wasn't here for the first session, all this code will be available for download. So you guys, if you have trouble following along or you don't feel like typing all this in, you can just download it. All right. So okay. So next, I'm going to figure out, okay, what's the path to this folder that I'm going to create? And so here I have a variable called the folder, which is where the user wants to process stuff. Now I'm going to create a folder in that folder. So first I'm going to build that path. So set the date folder to the folder and the date folder name, and I'm going to add a colon at the end because that's what AppleScript uses to delineate that something's a folder. So if I return this, you can see, okay, I chose the desktop. So the result of this is that I took the chosen folder, the desktop, and I appended this new folder name that I created to that path. So now I have a path to a folder that does not exist. It doesn't exist yet. Now I'm going to see if the folder does exist, right? So I'm going to tell the Finder to, if the date folder exists, if folder, the date folder exists, equals false, and I put this in parentheses so that this evaluates, like this whole expression evaluates first. So the result of folder, the date exists, is either going to be a true, it's either going to be a true or false, right? So if that equals false, so the folder does not exist, then, and I'm going to create it. And so let's see. So whenever, just like a tell and a repeat, you have to end an if with an end, right? So if I compile this, it changes to end if. Okay, so anytime you do a tell statement, a repeat statement, an if statement, you're always going to have an end repeat, or an end if, or an end tell, with very few exceptions. All right, so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make the folder. So here the folder doesn't exist, so I'm going to make it. So make new folder at the folder, right? So I'm going to make it in the folder the user chose with properties, and a property is an attribute of something. And a folder in the Finder has a name attribute. So when I say with properties, I'm actually going to put these in curly braces. So name, the date folder name. Okay? So if I run this, you can see it creates a folder called with today's date. Any questions about that so far? All right. And the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to move the current file to the date folder. All right, so remember, the current file is a variable that we defined in our repeat loop. So every loop, this variable is going to have whatever the current file in the loop is. Right? So I'm just going to say move the current file to the date folder. And move is a command the Finder understands, just like make is a command the Finder understands. Now, if I was doing this like for a client, I would add some additional protection in here. Like, what if the file already exists? You know, do you want to overwrite it? Do you want to change the name of it or something like that? But for this, I'm not going to add any of that. All right, so if I run this, it creates a folder on the desktop, and then it takes any other files that were on the desktop and it moves them into that folder. So just to kind of walk through this again. So first, ask me to choose a folder. I chose the desktop. Get a list of any files in that folder. And this folder didn't exist yet, so it didn't pick up that. And then loop through the files that it found. Actually, it's not picking up folders anyway. It's only picking up files. Then get the modification date of the file. Build a folder name based on that. Check to see if a folder exists that matches that. And if not, create it. And then move the current file. So I only had like 3 files. They're all dated. They're all modified today. But let's say I had, 100 files modified over all different days. I would get, the result would be that on my desktop I would have a bunch of dated folders for every modification date, and each of those folders would contain all the modified files from those dates. Yeah. Yeah, it could be a privileges thing, or. Oh, okay. Yeah, it could be that. Also, if you're moving to another disk, it will copy as well. So it doesn't move. So that, yes, Yeah, well, unless you're working on another disk or something like that. Yep. Okay. So that is okay. So that's our first little script here, and we're not going to walk through creating like every single script because we saw how that went with the Automator stuff. But I wanted to walk through creating at least like one script so you guys could get a feel for like how you write an AppleScript. All right. So how do you know like what terminology to use, right? How do you know that that the Finder has a folder called how do you know it's called a folder in the Finder? How do you know it could be called anything. Like it doesn't have to be called a folder because that's what you're used to. How do you know that a folder or a file has a modification date attribute? Well, to find that out, and this would go for any application you want to automate. So if you want to automate Photoshop or iTunes or something like that, you're going to consult the application's, well, documentation if they have it, if it's scripting documentation, but you're going to consult their AppleScript dictionary. So any scriptable application will have an AppleScript dictionary. And you can get to that by, in the script editor, AppleScript editor, going to File, Open Dictionary, and that will let you choose an application. Or you can go to Window, Library, and this brings up a list of commonly scripted applications, which I went and added like all of my apps to it. But you just drag an app to it. And this gives you kind of quick access to all of your applications, or all your application dictionaries. So from the library palette, you should, if you go to here, you should see like some of the typical apps, like Finder and stuff like that. So if I double click on Finder, it opens up the Finder's AppleScript dictionary. So, and it's kind of hard to see on this little screen, but I'll just kind of very briefly walk through like how a dictionary, what's in a dictionary. So in a dictionary, you will have what are called suites. These are like groupings of related terminology. And some applications might just have like one suite, but an application with like pretty good AppleScript support will probably have multiple suites. So the Finder, it has organized its terminology into different suites of commands. So these are like basic Finder things, things having to do with items, things having to do with containers or folders. So like things like disks, anything that can contain another thing are organized into this containers and folders suite. There's a file suite, Windows suite, and things like that. And actually, Apple has started to deprecate some of the Finder. They've been doing this for many years, but it's not like a new thing. But they've been deprecating some of the Finder AppleScript terminology, and they have a background application in OS X called System Events that is actually used more or they encourage you to use it more for certain things. And you probably should have in your library palette here, System Events should be listed as well. But you can see System Events actually has like a ton of stuff in it, which would probably be useful for you guys. But doing things with like things that you would find in system preferences, but also stuff in the file system. So things with the appearance, you can do stuff with folder actions. You can enable and disable folder actions from here. You can do some stuff with files and folders. Let's see, you can do things like restart the machine or log out the user. You can interact with some processes through GUI scripting, like clicking the mouse and typing keystrokes and things like that, which if we have time, I'll talk a little bit more about that. You can also access property list information. So if you have like a plist file and you want to read it and get a value out of it, you can do that. It has an XML suite, so if you need to read in an XML file and extract some values out of that, you can do that. You can create XML files and things with it as well. Expose, let's see, screensaver, dock, changing some of these kinds of things. Security even, I'm not sure what's in there, but you can access some security preferences. So Apple actually extends, System Events gets extended fairly frequently. Like I would say with every operating system, there's usually like something new in there. And it's pretty handy, especially for admin. Yeah. Yes. Exactly. Yep. Yep. So one example where like I use System Events more. So System Events, it can't do everything the Finder can do, and vice versa. But like let's say you have a folder, you want to get a list of files on like a server share, right? The Finder can do that, but System Events can do it way faster. So I will tell System Events to do that instead, typically, and then I might have the Finder do something to those files that if System Events can't do it. Another example, like the Finder, if you delete something, it moves it to the trash, but System Events, it will delete it immediately. So if you want to like write a script that deletes something, you can do that. You just want to be careful, obviously. System events doesn't have any concept of what the trash is. Okay, so if I go through here, you can see like a file, right? So we were working with files. If I click on a file, this shows me here's all the properties or attributes of a file. And Apple has also in AppleScript you can have kind of like a higher level class of item. So a finder or a file and a folder, they're different, but they're the same, right? They share some attributes. Like both a file and a folder have a modification date. Both a file and a folder have a name, right? So Apple has, rather than list this terminology twice, they listed it under a generic item class. And so if I look in here for an item, I will find all this terminology that every file and every folder has and every disk has and things like that. Whatever an Apple considers to be an item in the Finder. But then a file has unique attributes as well, like a version, a creator type, a file type. I don't even know if those are used anymore. But a folder likewise might have some attributes that a file doesn't have. So if I want to find the modification date of something, I'm going to go into the AppleScript dictionary and I'm going to look for, what I want to interact with, which in this case is a file. And I'm going to kind of scroll through this list of attributes. And if I look down here, there's actually a modification date attribute, which tells me in parentheses next to it that this returns, let's see, I guess I can make this bigger, which tells me that this attribute contains a date value, an AppleScript date. You can also see that some of these have an RO next to them, which means it's a read-only attribute. So, yes, that's right. You can actually set the modification date of a file with AppleScript. But you cannot set the modification date or you cannot set the creation date of a file, right? Because once it's created, it's created. So this, you can see the dictionary kind of gives you a lot of information. Now, how you form the script, that's a whole different thing, which we don't really have a lot of time to get into. But this is where you're going to go to find the terminology that you want. Really, like your best bet is to look online, like MaxScriptor or some of these resources for scripts that do similar things to what you want to do, and then kind of tweak them. But the dictionary will give you the actual terminology that you need. You just have to kind of figure out how to put it together. In addition to items and elements that you're going to interact with and their attributes or properties, you will also find commands in the Finder, or in the dictionary. So commands are actions you can take on these items, right? So you can open something, you can print something, you can quit something, you can activate something. Most applications have a standard suite. So even if an application is not scriptable, you can probably still like activate it or quit it with AppleScript. Whether you can do other stuff, that depends. But some of these are like standard things that like every application does. The Finder also has like a copy, which is not available yet. A sort command, right? Which it doesn't. Basically, what that does is, let's say I get a list of items in a folder, it will sort the results however I want them back. So maybe I want them sorted by name, so I can do something with them. Maybe I want to process them in a certain order. So that's what the Finder sort command does. Eject would eject a disk. And if you look at the command, it kind of tells you a little bit about the what it requires. So let's see here if I can find a good one. Well, I'll look at the make because it's or duplicate. Okay, so duplicate. So duplicate is telling me here's the duplicate command. It requires it requires something. It requires the item I want to duplicate. So I tell it duplicate some item, right? And then these there's parameters which are these are optional. If they're in brackets, they're optional. So I can duplicate an item, or I can duplicate an item to somewhere. I can choose. There's various options. I can choose whether I want to replace existing items. Routing suppressed. I don't even know what that does. Exact copy. I don't know what that does. But anyway, there's different. So there's different options for different commands. If I look at the make command, you can see I can make a new something. So make new folder at, and here I have to say where I want to make it, right? I can't just make. Well, actually, I think you can actually, even though it doesn't say it's optional. I think it might be. So I can make a new folder at somewhere at the desktop, right? If I'm making an alias, I could say make a new alias file to this folder or to this file at somewhere, right, at the desktop. And then here's where I said with properties. So when I said with properties, I'm passing it a list of properties for that item. So in that, when I created a folder, I passed it the name property, right? The name of the folder I wanted to create. Move, move this item to, oh, did I already do that? I did duplicate. Duplicate and move are very similar. Okay, so that is a quick, very, very quick run through of AppleScript dictionaries, but that's where you're going to find the terminology for the different apps that you're going to talk to. And you can see, just these two dictionaries are completely different. Like System Events has this huge list of suites, and the Finder just has a handful. But that's where you're going to find stuff. Okay, I want to mention recording versus writing. All right. So AppleScript Editor has a record button at the top, which looks enticing, right? Oh, I'll just click record and it'll go record stuff. Well, it doesn't really work that great. So, first of all, in order to record something in AppleScript, the application you want to record has to support recording. And there's like very, very, very few applications that actually support it. The Finder supports it. QuickTime might support it. I think it used to. I'm not sure if it still does. I don't even know what supports it because I never use it. But you'll find very few applications that actually support it. But just to give you an example, if I say record, and then I go in the Finder and I create a folder, we'll call it my folder. You can see it's writing AppleScript code in the background as I do stuff. And it's doing it for everything I do. So it's small, but tell Application Finder activate. Make new folder at desktop of folder, with set the name of untitled folder of desktop to my folder. Set position of Finder window, and I'm going to make another folder. We'll call this 1, 2, 3, 4. So you can see like my script is getting very, very long, and if I compile it, you can see very, very long. It's hard to go through. There's no comments or anything. There's no variables, no repeat loops, no if-then statements. If I run this, I get an error because it's trying to name a folder. So it created a new folder called untitled folder, and then it's trying to name it to my folder, but there's already a folder there called my folder, blah, blah, blah. Recording's not that great. So there's a lot of problems with it, but also I can just write a script to do this way, way faster and more efficiently than, suppose I want to create 1,000 folders. I'm not going to sit here and record that process so I can play it back. So instead, let's just write this so we can see what it would look like. So set the output folder to, well, we'll say choose folder. Tell App Finder. Repeat with, I'm going to use a different kind of repeat loop. Repeat with A from 1 to 10. And A is going to be a number from 1 to 10. Make new folder at the output folder with properties name A. So I will run this, and I will create a folder, my folder, and if I look here, it now created 10 folders, right? If I want to create 100 folders, now I just change this to 100. And now I've got 100 folders. So way more efficient than trying to record it, and in only a few lines of code. Yep. You could. Yeah. I mean, to do something like that, you'd probably say like set the folder name to A, right? If A, let's see, A as string. If length of the folder name, or actually, let's see. I'm going to do another repeat. Repeat until length of the folder name is equals 3. Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, it's been around a long time, but it's never really been fully supported by apps. I mean, I don't really know why, if they just don't understand the benefit of it, or if it's too hard to implement. But not many apps support it. I can only think of a handful. You know, if anybody still uses Quark, there used to be a plugin you could get for Quark that made it recordable, and that was cool. But you know, that stuff doesn't even exist anymore. I don't even know what's recordable in Lion or Mountain Lion. Okay, so that is recording versus writing. Okay, let's see. So there's some other stuff in here that I'm just going to probably skip over because we only have a half an hour left, and I don't want to take up too much of your time. If you want to create a drop script, I'll just mention it briefly. I'm not going to walk through it, creating it, but you just insert this into your script on open and some value or some variable, the items, and then you can loop through those items. So when you add that to your script, it automatically gets this little, arrow on the script app, and so now you can drag stuff onto it. So if I drag this, it just all this does is display the name of the current item or whatever I dropped onto it, names of whatever I dropped onto it. But that shows you how you can create a drop script. Image events. So in OS 10, there's a background application called image events, and it's kind of like what the Automator actions use for manipulating images. So if you want to write an AppleScript to like do stuff to images, you can actually do that. If I go back to AppleScript editor and up to my library palette again, you should have this, I believe, in there by default, but image events is like a background app in OS 10. And it lets you do some basic image manipulations, like cropping an image, embedding a color profile in an image, flipping, padding an image, which adds like a border around it, rotating, and then you can save images in different formats. So like, let's say you wanted to convert a folder of JPEGs to TIFFs. You could write an AppleScript to do that. Or you could write an AppleScript to open up a bunch of JPEGs, change the size, and then save them out as TIFF. It doesn't save as PDF, but it will open PDF files, so you can use it for some of that processing. But it has all kinds of cool stuff for doing image manipulation. So let me just open up an image event script. Okay, so the first thing, I ask the user to choose a folder of images. Then I'm going to get a list of files in that folder. Again, telling the Finder. You can see now I've kind of broken out my Finder tell statement into just this one area because I don't want to have nested tell statements, ideally. Next, I'd ask the user to choose an output folder. So where do you want the images to go? I could go to the same folder, but then I might overwrite the other images. So if I was going to do that, I might want to add some protection against this if it was like going to a user or something. Then I'm going to loop through the images that I found in that folder, and I'm going to tell the application image events to launch, which, so when you target an app, if you use the launch command, it's supposed to launch in the background. Image events doesn't have an interface anyway. But like, let's say you wanted to launch InDesign. If you use launch, it should open in the background, in theory, and activate will launch it and bring it to the front. Next, just like any other application, I'm going to tell image events to open the image. Again, it doesn't have an interface, so you won't actually see anything on screen. And then I'm going to tell that image that got opened to get its name, scale it to 200 pixels, and save it into the output folder the user chose with the same name, and then close. And this all happens behind the scenes, so the user doesn't actually see anything. Is there a question or anything? Okay, so if I run this, so I have some example images here. Oh, it's asking for a folder, so I'm going to choose my folder of images. And next is asking for an output folder, so I'll just create one, call it converted images. And the script runs, and let me go here. So the examples, and you can see that that's the size of them, but if I go here, you can see they've now been scaled down into the same format, basically. But I could save them out in another format if I want. Yeah? You could have it scaled up, but you would lose image quality. Yeah. Yes, I believe so. I think if the image, so what I would probably do then is add if-then logic in here that says if the size of the image is not already 200, then scale it, right? So yeah, I mean, you want to kind of try to anticipate those kinds of things when you write an AppleScript so that you can, prevent problems that the users might encounter for your. It works on the largest side. So if you look in the image events dictionary, the scale command, so you can scale by a factor, which would be like a percentage. So you want to scale by 50 or 0.5, or I forget if you do it 50 or 0.5. But that would scale it to half size, or you can scale it to a size, which is on its longest side. So you can't really scale it based on a specific side. Of course, for more advanced image processing, you use like Photoshop or Graphic Converter, both scriptable. All right. So that is Image Events, a background app that you guys have. Shell scripting. So I know everybody's using Unix commands for different things. Here's a couple scripts that I wrote for different things, which you guys can download. This first one, it asks. I actually use this fairly frequently. It asks for a list of it displays a list of processes that are running, and then it allows me to kill one. Right. So if I run this, I can choose any process that's running, and then it will just kill that process. So this uses the do shell script command, which is a command that AppleScript has. If you want to read about do shell script, there's actually a tech note. It's tech note 2065 on Apple's site. I don't know if I have internet here. But 26, just search for tech note 2065, and you will find like all kinds of documentation on do shell script, because you can do stuff like with administrator privileges and things like that. So here I'm just using the do shell script command. Oh, also on a related note, terminal is also scriptable. So do shell script it just lets you trigger like one command. You can pipe commands together, but if you want to do like a more interactive thing, then you can actually script terminal to do stuff as well. And you can tell it to issue a command, then wait for a result back, and then tell it to do something else. So I think like if you had a process that you had to maybe enter a password or something like that, and you had to wait for it to respond back asking you for that, I don't think that you'd be able to really do it with do shell script, but with scripting the terminal, you might be able to do it. So here, basically, I'm getting a list of processes, and I'm just using these commands, ps and grep, to get the process names. Right? So if I return result here, you can see here's a list of what's running. Then I'm splitting that up into a list of paragraphs. Right? So now you can see this is enclosed in curly brackets because that's an AppleScript list. So I have a list now of processes. And then I'm just looping through that list, and I'm filtering out some stuff. So if the current process if the paragraph is not empty and the process name does not contain grep, then I'm filtering out and I'm getting the process ID in the process name. Then I'm using AppleScript's choose from list command to ask the user to select the process to kill, and if they click the cancel button, then that results in a value of false. So I'm stopping if they click false. So if I run this and click cancel, it basically is stopping right here. Then I'm getting whatever the user chose, and I'm asking them if they really want to kill that process. So if I say, let's see, I could probably have it sort this stuff if I wanted to as well. So it's saying, are you sure you want to kill AppleScript editor? And if they click cancel there, it stops here. And then if they click yes, then it does another do shell script command to kill that process ID. So this is just, I find this, I keep it in my script menu. It's like quick for me to trigger, and I don't have to like go to like my application monitor or try to force quit something, especially for like processes that are background processes. Okay, so there's the tech note documentation. So Apple has like a lot of documentation on this and sample code and stuff to do all kinds of things that you guys might want to do. So do shell script is probably something you guys will be using a lot, I would think. Here's another script that I wrote for myself. I use Git at a client. I actually don't have it installed on this machine, so I can't run it right now, but I use Git at a client to check files into a Git server every day pretty much. And so every time I check in a project, I have to type in a series of commands. It's always the same things. Like I want to do a git add dot, which adds anything that I've added that's new. Git add -a probably, which adds certain things that git add dot doesn't do. And then git add -u, which removes things that have been deleted. So I basically just use a series of do shell script commands to run all of this. And then at the end, it does a git push origin master, which pushes to a Git server. So it actually launches terminal and prompts me for my password. And so the only thing I have to do then is trigger, I basically trigger the script, right? If I run this, it says, okay, select the project folder, and I just choose a folder that I want to commit, and it runs through the series of Git commands, and then it launches terminal, and it initiates a Git push origin master. All you have to do is type my password. So in like 2 seconds, I can now, oh, it actually also, let's see, it does a little bit more. It asks me for a commit message. So when if you guys use, if you use Git, you can type a commit message, which is like comments about what you may have changed since the last time you checked it in. So I can type a commit message. It also uses this try statement to check to see, like maybe this has already been committed, and then it gives me, an option. Do I want to override the previous commit message? Yes or no? Or do I want to, just stop, I guess. So this is available in the download. I haven't commented this because I kind of hacked it together for myself, but you guys are welcome to play around with it, maybe get some ideas if you use Git, and it might be helpful. Cascade Finder windows. I like to show this just because it's a good demo. Okay, so first, I wrote a little script to set this up. So if I run this, does anyone's machine look like this? Lots of windows open. Oh, I guess I only have it creating a couple. 10 windows, but I could have it create like a ton. Now I have to find the folder that I want, which I guess I could use expose or something. I don't even know what the command is. Okay, so let's see. Alright, so I wrote this Cascade Finder Windows example, which basically, and you don't have to have it ask for all this stuff, but I have it, I've written like a subroutine that basically asks for input, and I can just call it a bunch of times. So when I run this, it asks how far I want between each item. Like how far do I want between the menu bar and the first window? How far do I want between the left of the screen and the first window? And then I can choose like how big I want the windows, how many pixels wide I want them, how offset I want them from one another, and then I can choose which way they cascade. And you can see now it just kind of lines them all up. So that one, that can be useful, I guess, if you want to use something like that. Another just example, though, of manipulating stuff in the Finder. You can manipulate the windows, things like that. I want to show you some demos of scripting other apps other than just the Finder, too. So here is an app that I use. Actually used it this week. So whenever I prepare a presentation, a lot of times I'm writing I'm building my presentation in Keynote, and I'm entering presenter notes and things like that. And then I want to maybe bring that into Evernote or something like that, right? So here I have a cat videos presentation about cat videos, internet phenomenon, right? So it talks all about, the history of cat videos on the internet. All right, so now I want to get these presenter notes to Evernote. Well, yeah, I could copy and paste them all, which I don't want to do because that's going to take me forever. Or I can write a script to do it. So here I have a script that, actually let me launch up Evernote here. All right, so I've got Evernote opened, and okay, so here I've got a script, and if I look here, right, basically, this script has a little bit of logic in it. So it tells Keynote if the first slideshow exists is false, so if there's no slideshow open, prompt the user to open one, and then stop. So that stops it. Next, I ask if they want to extract just the presenter notes or if they want to get the slide content too, because I might have text on the slides that I want to get in my presentation as well, or into my notes as well. And then I get the front slideshow. I get its name. And then I could loop through every slide, or in this case, I can just, I could loop through the slides one at a time and get their info. Or in this case, I'll just get it all at once. So I'll say, give me the title of every slide. And that basically gives me a list. So if I say return result here, I'll say no. You can see it gives me a list of the titles of all the slides. And then if I chose to extract the body too, it gives me the body of every slide, and then the notes of every slide. And then Evernote allows you to build HTML content, like HTML formatted text, and you can create a note and use that as the basis of the note. So I'm basically just appending a bunch of HTML tags to the stuff that I got out of Keynote. So I start by putting like a header and things like that. I don't even think all this stuff's necessary, but I put a header like Keynote presentation, and I format it as like a heading, and then I loop through the titles I extracted, and I start building this list of slides and titles and bodies and presenter notes. And then I use some AppleScript trickery to merge that all together with line breaks in between them. And then I just tell Evernote to create a new note in the inbox with the presentation name as the title and the formatted text that I've created as the HTML, and then open it. So if I run this, if I want to extract slide content too, I'll say no, and you can see it creates a nice little formatted Evernote document. Quick and handy. I use it all the time. So that is an example of application scripting, and hopefully you guys can take some of these techniques back and use them in some of the things you guys are doing. Here's another little silly script that I wrote called Desktop Race. So here I have a bunch of files. We'll see if I can do this without crashing the Finder. Every time I run this, it, for some reason, decides the Finder is going to crash on me. All right, so I've got a bunch of files, and I have a script called Desktop Icon Race. So let's say I want to, I'm bored and I want to take a break and race all my icons across my screen until one of them is declared a winner. So here I am getting the bounds of the desktop, and then I'm getting the items on the desktop, and then I'm kind of positioning them, right? So I'm turning off auto arrangement. Like right now I have my desktop set to sort by name and things like that and keep things arranged. So I'm turning all that off so I can move things around. And then I'm kind of creating these variables that get heights and different things. And then I'm picking contestants and spectators. So I don't want to race every item. I only want to race some of them. So I'm figuring out like how many contestants can fit on a screen. And then I'm taking everybody else and making them a spectator. So I'm kind of like moving them off to the side. And then I'm lining up all the contestants and racing them across the screen at random until one gets declared a winner. So you can see you can do really useful stuff too. All right, so let's see. I don't know if this will hide, but all right. So on your mark. So these are all the spectators watching, and it's speaking too.
Cool.
Right. So calendar entry 1, and the Finder didn't crash that time. So yeah. So I like to come up with fun stuff too. All right, so that another thing you can do with the Finder Here's another one that I use pretty regularly. Evernote doesn't have a feature for scaling images, right? So a lot of times I write like a blog post or something, and I write it in Evernote. So suppose I have a note here, my blog entry, and I have an image. Now I've got all this desktop crap. Let's see, where's my screenshot? There it is. I'll just drag that up here, right? So this screenshot's huge, but I don't want it that big. I just want, like, because you can't see any text. I have to scroll all the way down to see the text. So I wrote an app that it's just an AppleScript app, and I set some attributes in its plist file, in its info plist file, and now it shows up in my Open With menu. And if I choose this is just AppleScript. That's it, right? So and this uses image events. So it's asking me what size do I want for this image. I'll say medium, and then it scales the image down. So this is a pretty big image. I'll say I want it low. But just scales it down. So basically what this is doing, though, is the AppleScript is essentially a drop script, right? And I've set some attributes that say, okay, process selected. I'm saying that this app will process images. It's an image editor, essentially. And so this is a file in Evernote. The file is actually stored like in a temporary folder. So when I right-click on it and I say Open With, it's really just passing that file, dropping it on the script. So I'll just open up the script so you can see kind of what it does. But it's similar to what I was doing in image events already, right? So first it asks me what size I want to create, and then it sets up based on that like a maximum dimension. Okay, so these are the sizes that I decided we're going to be in there. Like low res is 320 pixels on its biggest side. Then let's see. Okay, then I'm asking the user to choose which one they want. Oh, that's right. I have a custom option too, right? So they can choose custom size. So if they choose custom, it asks them what size they want. And then, and it has some logic in there that, like, if they don't enter a number, it keeps asking them until they enter a number. Then I just loop through the images, which there should only be one. And then I'm telling, same thing we did earlier, telling image events to launch, open the image, get the dimensions. So here I have some logic to see, is the maximum size greater than or less than what I want? If it's less than, then scale it. And then I'm just saving it. And then Evernote automatically updates to show the modified image. So I actually use that all the time, that script. Okay, all right, so I'm going to skip these last few. You guys are welcome to go through them on your own in the demo, in the examples. I'm going to jump back into my slides here, and because we've only got 12 minutes left, and I'm just going to mention a few things and give you some resources. Let's see. There it is. Nope, that's not it. See, I should have written a cleanup script to get rid of all these stupid desktop icons. Okay, so user interface automation. So when you script stuff, you're going to run into limitations, whether it's with Automator or AppleScripts. There's going to be things that you might not be able to automate. So some of the limitations. There's limited actions available in Automator. You're only going to be able to automate things for scripts for things that actions exist for, unless you want to implement AppleScript in your Automator workflows. If you want to do things with shell script or AppleScript or whatever or Cocoa, you have to learn how to do it, right? You have to figure it out. You have to find a script that does similar to what you want and modify it. So it takes time, right? You might not have a lot of time, and some applications might not have features. Or they might not be accessible to script things or at all. Like there just might not be a way to do it. And so if you have limited time or something like that, you might want to look at user interface automation. So what I mean by that is you're simulating user interaction. You're automating the process of clicking the mouse and selecting, typing keystrokes and things like that a user would do manually. Now, one thing of note, for a lot of the user interface automation, you have to have access for assistive devices enabled in the accessibility system preference, or universal access or whatever it's called now. Some companies don't allow this for security reasons because, it could be used to like, detect somebody's password or something like that. So just be aware of that. Automator has a record button, just like AppleScript editor. It's a little bit different though. If you click record in Automator, it shrinks down into this little little black window, and it watches what you do. And you can go then around and click things and do stuff, and it will insert this watch me do action. When you click stop, it inserts a watch me do action, and if you play that back, it does what you did. So it like moves the mouse around and clicks things and stuff like that. It's very error prone though. So it doesn't always pick up everything that you do, and sometimes it does stuff that you don't want it to do. So I don't use it very often. You might find it useful for certain things, but overall it's kind of buggy and doesn't work great. GUI scripting. We saw in the system events AppleScript dictionary, there's a suite of commands for doing things that interact with processes like clicking mouse buttons and clicking buttons on windows and typing keystrokes and things like that. But for an application to support that, it has to be considered accessible. Most apps are, but not all. You can, if you have Xcode installed, you can use something called the Accessibility Inspector, or there's a third-party tool down here called UI Browser that allows you to like kind of hover your mouse over things, and it will tell you like the path to that item or how to access that item kind of with AppleScript or whatever, right? So that's helpful. And I know I'm going through this fast, so if you guys have questions, you're welcome to ask me afterwards. There's also macro utilities like iKey. There used to be one called Quick Keys, which has never been updated for I think 10.5 they didn't update it for, and I don't know what's happening with it. But iKey is basically like a macro tool, right? So you can tell it to go click things, and you can have it click things by coordinates, or you can have it inspect things. So it's kind of like GUI scripting, but you don't have to like write any code. So that I recommend for clients a lot. And it can sometimes access things that you can't access with GUI scripting. So that's also very useful. Screen-based automation. There was a little bit of talk about this the other day. There's a couple tools. One is called Eggplant, and one is called Sakuli. Eggplant's a commercial tool, and Sakuli is available at the moment for free. These things work by looking at the screen, like pictures of the screen. So like with Sakuli, for example, you take screenshots of the things you want it to click, and then it looks for those pictures on screen and clicks them. So you can move stuff around. Like you could have a disk, and that disk could be down here, and it still will work because it's looking for the picture of the disk, not the actual disk. Eggplant works a little bit differently. You have an administrator machine, and then you have you VNC into it, and you control it with Eggplant. So you could actually you could run your administrator machine on a PC, on a Mac, and then you can control a PC or a Mac or anything you can VNC to. So that's kind of interesting as well. I'm not sure what the cost of it is, but you can check out some demos on their website. Web automation. People are always asking me, I want to automate, going to my bank account and downloading transactions or logging into a website or whatever, right? AppleScript and Automator are not good at that stuff. Every website's different. And so there's no like AppleScript dictionary for the internet, right? Safari has commands that you can do some things. Like you can open up a URL and you can trigger a JavaScript command and things like that. You can get the source code of a web page. But there's a third-party app called Fake, which is like Automator for the web. Basically, you build a workflow that maybe opens up a web page, and then fills in this field, fills in that field, clicks this button, things like that. So it can really be useful for web automation, like testing. Maybe you're building a website, you want to test it and keep running it over and over again. So it can be useful for that, or maybe even just automating some web process. That's actually available in the App Store, I believe. Automation and security. Apple's big on security right now. OS X's default is secure. There's two key security features that impact automation in OS X Mountain Lion: Gatekeeper and App Sandbox. First of all, if you are writing scripts and workflows for yourself, they pretty much run unrestricted. So you're not really going to run into problems, I don't think, with them. It's if you're going to distribute them to other people is where you may run into some limitations. Gatekeeper restricts usage of downloaded apps. So if you send a script to somebody through email or through download, depending on their gatekeeper setting, they may or may not be able to open it, right? By default, people can open up apps from the Mac App Store for registered developers. Odds are you're not tying your AppleScripts or Automator workflows to a registered developer ID. So they're probably not going to be able to run it. One workaround, Control-click and choose Open from the contextual menu in the Finder. That will allow you to get around that. But the other option would be to change their gatekeeper setting to allow any app to run, which they may or may not want to do. So that's one issue. Can you get apps in the Mac App Store? You can. AppleScript apps? You can. It's not easy. So your options. Distribute apps as is, but your users are going to run into limitations. Prepare and submit to the Mac App Store. You can. Not easy. You're probably going to get rejected and have to go through an appeal process. Not that I know from any experience, but you can sign AppleScripts and Automator workflows with a developer ID certificate. So if you create a developer ID and you get download a certificate, you can sign scripts and apps with that. If you want sample code or help with that, feel free to message me on Twitter or email me and I'll help you. Sandboxing. What is sandboxing? By default, your app has no interaction with other apps, unless the user specifically allows it. It can't interact with files and folders unless the user chooses them. You don't have to sandbox your app yet. Unless you're going to sell it in the Mac App Store. If you're going to sell it in the Mac App Store, it has to be sandboxed. If you're going to just create an app, it doesn't have to be sandboxed unless Apple starts to, require that. How can sandbox apps talk to other apps? Because you might need to. You can request what are called entitlements. If you create an app and you want to sell it in the Mac App Store or sandbox it for some reason, you can create what are called entitlements. It's basically an XML file telling or requesting permission to, here's what my app needs to talk to. It needs to talk to mail, or it needs to talk to this folder, right? And then Apple may or may not grant those entitlements to you. In most cases, probably not, but they may. And that's how you get around that limitation. But you have to have very good justification if you want to sell something in the Mac App Store for why you need an entitlement like that. If you are developing an app and you want to have Automator actions in it, Automator is exempt from Sandbox. So anything running in Automator, exempt. You can have Automator actions. They don't have to have any sandboxing on them or anything, because Automator loads them and it is exempt. Anything loaded by an app is bound by the sandboxing of the app that's running it, right? So Automator has free reign of the operating system, so it can run any of your actions. Running embedded scripts is not allowed. So that's one reason why FileMaker is not a sandboxed app yet, because FileMaker has the ability to run AppleScripts within it. If Apple sandboxes it, it can't do that, because that would be running arbitrary code, which could be malicious. That's why Text Expander is not in the Mac App Store. And some of these other apps are not in the Mac App Store because they allow people to run code, and Apple will not allow that at this time. Mail has the ability to trigger AppleScripts from mail rules. Mail is a sandboxed app. In order to do that, Apple has now created a folder called Application Scripts in the user's library folder. If the user wants to trigger a mail rule script, it has to be manually put there by the user. That is the user authorizing that script to run on their machine, and it can now run. I'm going to skip over the rest and just mention, because I've got 30 seconds left, various resources. Apple's Developer Center is a great resource. macOSXautomation.com, another good resource for AppleScript and Automator stuff and services. MacScripter.net is a great forum where you can find answers to almost anything that you can do or anything you might need to do. Really, really good resource. I have a tips section on my website. I have written dozens of introductory articles on all this stuff, and almost all of them are available on there. Links to them for free through MacTech, Macworld, Apple, whatever. And that is all I have time for. So here's where you can go download all the scripts and more and workflows that I mentioned today, all my slides, everything. That stuff will also be up on the YouTube video. Thank you. Have a good day.